Hello, everyone. Welcome to Americans for the Arts Johnson Fellowship for Artists Transforming Communities program. We will be starting in just a few minutes, so please silence your cell phones and find your seats. This event is being live streamed, so please no flash photography during the event. Please welcome Americans for the Arts President and CEO, Nolan B. Bivens.
Good evening. Oh, okay, good. Welcome to Americans for the Arts public celebration of our 2023 Johnson Fellowship for Artists Transforming Communities, recipient G. Peter Jemison. My name is Nolan Bivens, and I am the President and CEO of Americans for the Arts. Americans for the Arts is committed to recognizing and supporting the diverse networks of organizations and individuals who cultivate, nurture, and support arts and culture in our communities. We believe that arts transforms lives. We believe that artists can make our communities more healthy, equitable, and vibrant places. Community is at the heart of what we do. As such, it is with deep gratitude to those who came before us that we acknowledge that Americans for the Arts is based on the unceded lands of the Acostan, also documented as Nacotchtank, Piscataway, and Pumanque peoples. Within 40 years of the arrival of English coloners, indigenous populations in our area were decimated by the introduction of new diseases and war. Tribes were pushed to merge or were sold into slavery into the Caribbean islands. According to officials at the National Museum of American Indian, there is no living Nacotchtank lineage left. Their numbers were wiped out and survivors were adopted into the Piscataway people, thereby losing their original language, identity, and descendancy. The Piscataway Kanoi tribe was officially recognized by Executive Order of 2012 after decades of work with the state of Maryland. We invite you to join us in paying respects to elders, past and present, and in considering the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us to where we are today. Thank you. Now, I appreciate the opportunity to welcome to this evening. Tonight, we are here to celebrate the life and work of G. Peter Jemison, a member of Seneca Huron clan and renowned artist and lifelong artist. Peter is the recipient of the 2023 Johnson Fellowship for Artists Transforming Communities Award. This was established in 2018 through the generous support of the Robert and Laurel Johnson Trust in recognition of their belief that artists, when given the opportunity, can create real pathways for change. Peter exemplifies the spirit of this award. His career spans decades of creating political works that portray contemporary social commentary, as well as those that reflect the relationships with the natural world. His works are rooted in the framework of Native American art. They embody Orinda, the traditional Iroquois belief that every living thing and part of creation contains a spiritual force. A leading authority of Haudenosaunee history, he co-created and co-edited the Treaty of Ganondagan, 1794, 200 years of treaty relationships between the Iroquois Confederacy and the United States. He frequently contributes writings on the repatriation of sacred objects, cultural patrimony, and human remains of the Haudenosaunee tribe. His political and community activism led to the establishment of Ganondagan State Historic Site and the Seneca Art and Culture Center in Victor, New York, where he served as historic site manager from 1988 to 2022. A National Historic Landmark, Ganondagan is the only New York site historic dedicated to a Native American theme, and the only Seneca town developed and interpreted in the United States. And that only scratches the surface of Peter's distinguished accomplishments. I could drop the mic here, but I won't. I have more to say later on. Our program tonight features a conversation with Peter, led by another giant in the art world, John Haworth. John is a member of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma and Senior Executive Emeritus of the Smithsonian National Museum of American Indians George Gustav High Center in New York City. Prior to joining the museum staff in 1995, John served as an assistant commissioner for cultural institutions at the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs. As an educator and an author, John has written extensively on cultural and museum issues, including articles from the National Museum for the American Indian Exhibition, catalogs, and magazines. He has lectured extensively internationally and was a featured speaker in UNESCO in Paris in 2010. John is also a treasured member of the Americans for the Arts family. He joined the board of one of our predecessor organizations, the National Assembly of Local Arts Agencies, or NALA as we would call it, over 30 years ago. He brought his extensive knowledge and expertise in local arts and cultural development in public art and in the public policy to the new organization. On a more personal note, John, as a longtime board member of Americans for the Arts, has been an invaluable advisor, visionary, and yes, friend. The topic that John and Peter tackles tonight is the role of the artist as community catalyst. And now, without further ado, please help me welcome John Haworth and Peter Jemison.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you for that introduction, Nolan. That means a lot. I just want to kick this off by saying I have known Peter Jemison for many, many years. I've worked with him through the National Museum of the American Indian. He's been front and center on several key projects that have meant the world to me. I've seen him as an activist, as an advocate for repatriation, for taking direct action when things aren't going right. He speaks up about it, speaks his mind. His community ties are deep and very important. His community means a lot to him. He's very front and center on the discourse about Native American issues and politics and arts, funding and advocating for museums and all the arts. He's a terrific curator and has an incredible track record in that area. He's a published writer and historian. He's been a trustee, and he's been an important mentor to me and to many others over the years. He is a remarkable elder in our field and and I'm so honored that you are receiving this important award. So Peter, with all of that in mind, I want to dig deep this evening and find out what really anchors you, what informs you through your work, and how are you doing it?
Thank you, John. And John has really been a great supporter. He often takes the time to go and see exhibits that I'm in, and I'm always amazed that he's seen things that I just don't, always know other people are seeing. So I really appreciate your support and your enthusiasm for the work that I have done. To answer your question, I suppose I have to say that. First of all, I want to give a greeting to everybody in my language, Onundawakgagawano, the language of the people of the Great Hill. I say Nyaweskano Swagwego. I give thanks that all of you are well, that you've arrived here safely. Onundawaka ni a. I'm a person of the people of the Great Hill. That's the word we use for ourselves. The word Seneca has no meaning in our language. And I belong to the Heron clan of the Seneca Nation. And the Heron clan has given me the name Ganondagan. And it has something to do more with the responsibilities I carry within my community in a ceremonial way of life. That, I think, is the anchor. The anchor is who I am and what I have learned over my lifetime, what it means to say Onundawaka ni a, that, I understand that we have our own language, that we have our own government, that we have our own, treaties with the United States, that we have communities where our people live and work, and that we have, a future which is dependent upon the work that we who are here now do for those who are coming yet, those that are unborn yet, we say. And looking forward, looking ahead to that idea, we who are here now, we do the best job we can to ensure that there'll be something for those that are coming in the future, just as we believe those who preceded us did that. They were looking out for us. They were trying to make sure that in the end there was land that we could live upon. They wanted to make sure that the ceremonial way of life was passed down. And those who are fluent speakers made every effort they could to pass along our language. And that has been a mighty effort. But all of that has been what has informed me and what has helped me to, steer us, stay on the right path. That's the title of a show I just opened in New York, On the Right Path.
Well, Peter, one of the things, you had a remarkable and important career in the arts in New York City, but you also came to a conclusion at a certain point in your life to say, I'm going back home. I'm going back to rural upstate New York, in Western New York, not far from Rochester and Buffalo, right?
Yes.
Yeah, what was that all about?
Well, probably about 1984, my cousin John Mohawk, I had invited him to New York to come and speak, and I honestly can't remember the topic right at this moment. John was a genius and a very great historian, but he said to me at the end of the conversation that we were having, "Are you sick of New York yet?" And I said, "As a matter of fact, I am. I'm sick of New York." And just the need to be closer to home was pulling at me, and I wanted to change. New York takes a lot of energy. New York City takes a lot of energy, and I felt as though I had done a lot. When is it time to stop doing what you're doing? You have to feel it in your own heart that it's time to move on, do something else. And he said, "Well, there's an opening coming up. There's a Seneca Historic Site that needs a manager, and we're just getting it off the ground now, and you could be that person. There's land there. There's 237 acres of land, and there's a couple of grants that we have from the National Endowment for the Humanities." I won't go into all that, but anyway, that opportunity sounded great until I arrived there. And when I arrived there, it was a falling down farm. The house was unlivable. There was nothing but weeds everywhere. There was nothing. And I thought to myself, what have I done? What am I thinking? And so for the next 34 years, I made it into something that I think has some meaning, and it will, I hope, continue to reach a lot of people, a lot of young people especially.
How was the community responding to your coming home? What was that about?
Well, they were glad to see that I did come back. I had been away, and I would get back whenever I could, but it was always a 7 or an 8 hour drive from New York back home. So I couldn't be there for everything that was taking place. I had to pick and choose when I could get away and spend enough time there. So they were glad to see me come back, and and right away, fortunately for me, the Repatriation Act was just about to be passed. We were kind of on the cusp of that, and repatriation was an issue that my Confederacy was very keen about, and so we lost a member of our community who was carrying on that kind of work, and they handed it to me. Here, this is your job. You're going to take care of this part. And as I said, the law hadn't even passed yet, but we began as early as 1989. So I had a role, and then not only did I have a role doing that, but I was, managing this historic site, which, as I say, was really just getting off the ground. In 1987, we opened. And then I went back to my, community, and really, because first I was working for the Confederacy of 6 nations: Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, Mohawk, and Tuscarora. But really there was a lot to do within my own community, within the Seneca community, and so again, there were ways in which I could contribute, and people made that available to me.
I'm just curious. I know you're a true believer in repatriation and why and its importance.
Yes.
Why is it so important, and what drives you to be so involved in this?
Well, okay, so I had to go to museums that had collected our ancestors' human remains. And those remains were wrapped up in newspaper. They were sitting in cardboard boxes. They were in the bottom of a museum or in a warehouse or in wherever they were being kept. And there was no studying going on. The notion that there would be studies at some point that would rely upon these remains, there was no evidence of that to me. And I felt as though there wasn't really a proper respect being shown to them. When I looked at some of the newspapers they were wrapped in, they had been wrapped in those newspapers since the 30s, the 40s, and even earlier. And so, my instructions from my elders were, bring home the human remains and everything else will follow. So start with the repatriation of the human remains. So, this is a federal law. It's called the NAGPRA Law, Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And it outlines the responsibilities of a museum, which was first to send us a summary of their collection, then send us an inventory. And all of these different museums around the US that receive federal funding were required to do that. And then we had the task of responding to this information that was sent to us and deciding which ones we could approach first. And it involved travel, it involved putting together a committee, and so all of that. But I believed from the beginning that the right thing was to return my ancestors to the earth, put them back on the path that they had been on when they passed away, and then we had put them in the ground in a sacred manner. That needed to continue. They needed to return to the earth. And, then after that, we'd look into our cultural patrimony, our wampum belts, and then we would follow with our sacred objects and bring home our sacred objects because our ceremonial way of life still exists. So I just believe that was important, and I had the support of my community behind me.
I like how you've drawn the connection between the ceremonial and traditional aspects of your community life and with the repatriation. Yeah. But I've also seen you've been a fierce advocate and having to take direct action to make sure that that what needs to be returned home is returned. Can you talk a little bit about that and some of the challenges you had over the years in living that out?
Well, I'll try not to throw anybody under the bus. So
that's good.
There were museums that didn't believe the law was constitutional, and so therefore they resisted return. And the federal law is very clear. And to me, either you respect the law or you don't respect the law. And if you don't respect the law, well, that's too bad. I'm going to have to force you to respect the law. And it may take me, in one case, it took me 20 years Well, I didn't give up. I mean, for 20 years, I fought the fight and we got the remains back and put them in the ground. And now we have some more that we have to deal with that come from that same institution. And, it doesn't end. I mean, it's still going on. And, and I'll tell you that there are other museums too that are suddenly discovering that there are ones that somehow or other were not found during the inventory, or somehow or other, when the return took place, these didn't get out. And so, it's, at any rate, it really required, first of all, I would always say to the people that were at the museum, I didn't come up with these ideas on my drive over here. I was given this instruction of what I'm supposed to do. I'm simply carrying it out. I know it doesn't make you happy, and it's not about you. It's not that I don't like you. What I'm telling you is I want you to follow the law and comply with the law. And that's what I'm going to bug you about. So, you're going to have to get used to it, or you're going to be crying. And there were some people who did cry because I didn't give up. But that was what I was told to do. That was the instructions my elder, who I really respected, gave me.
So you're carrying this on to the next and future generations as well,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yes.
That's great. Let me get a read from you, Peter, on, you've been a trustee at the National Museum of the American Indian. You've been a leader in many local museums, the Seneca National Museum, and at the historic site just south of Rochester.
Yes.
What's your read on what are museums today doing right? What could they do better? What's your read on that?
Well, we just had a meeting. I'm going to talk about NMAI, the National Museum of the American Indian. There are two branches that really are open to the public on a day-to-day basis, and one is here in Washington and one is in New York City, the George High Center down at Bowling Green. And when you walk into the George High Center, for us, there is nothing that says this is a Native American museum that you're walking into. There needs to be some improvement over what you see when you first come in, and also how you are received as you are entering the building. What do you see first, and what kind of feelings do you get? And the George High Center is a very difficult situation. What is the agency called that manages?
The General Services.
General Services Administration has a screening set up, so when you come in, everyone gets screened, your stuff goes through a conveyor belt and, it's examined. But, we have to deal, when we go there, as a trustee, we deal with the attitude of the people that are working for the GSA. And here we're there volunteering our time and serving on the board of this museum, and they haven't got a clue. And I don't know if anyone trains them to recognize, So you have this very unique situation where there's a shell, which is the building owned by the GSA. Inside of that shell is the National Museum of the American Indian. And to tell you how goofy it is in one way, there are a series of Reginald Marsh paintings on the ceiling of the rotunda that are all about, shipping. And when the customs house, which is what the building was, when everything came in there, that was imported from wherever it came. And that's where the people came to fill out their bill of lading or whatever they did. Well, to try to turn that into the National Museum of the American Indian, okay, to try and interpret a history that 90% of the people coming in don't know at all, that's the challenge. And here in Washington, that is the challenge. We had a very long conversation about what do people on the mall expect when they come to the museum, and what do they get when they go to the African Museum, when they go to Air and Space? What do they get there? What do they get in the other institutions that they go to? And why do they have the big audiences there? Because they have addressed what it is the audience expectations are, and they have found a way to deal with that. At NMAI, there isn't a chronological history of everything that has happened. There are individual exhibits that address individual or specific things. And so, for those who are coming there looking for that other, history line, it's not there. And that's a challenge. That's a challenge for how do we make that accessible and understandable when the audience finds it.
Well, one of the observations I have in knowing your work and knowing that this is a real breakout time in your life, in your career as an artist.
Yeah.
And you're now being collected by the big mainstream institutions. You've got work at the Whitney Museum. The National Gallery has one of your pieces I know they've acquired recently out of the show that's currently on view at the National Gallery.
Yes.
You had a big showing at the Museum of Modern Art at the Greater New York Show at PS1 MoMA in Queens with an entire gallery devoted to your work and kind of seeing that all together. So you're getting that recognition at long last, but I've always felt like we were talking earlier about this, there's no overnight sensation. I remember in the days, you now have gallery representation, you've been invited to play a key role in the Venice Biennale, you are basically standing very tall in this area, but this did not come overnight. It's been a long struggle. Could you reflect a little bit about that?
Yeah. First I was an artist. That's how I began my young adulthood, as I'm going to be an artist, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to gain some recognition for my art in the big art world, in the Native American art world as well. And the two, at the time when I began, there was no meeting of the minds on this matter. There was Native American art over there, primarily in New Mexico or Arizona, unless you lived on the Northwest coast. And then there was New York, and then there was Washington, and then there was Chicago, or wherever you might want to say. But we were on the outside looking in. And all the time I was in New York, I battled that, trying to present contemporary Native American art in the heart of the art world on West Broadway in Soho, during the time when that was the spot. But to me, I can do it. I have that attitude, I can do it. And if I can do it, it's something that I'm going to take it on if I believe I can do it. Now, there will be other people that look at that and say, you really wasted a lot of time because what about your own career? What about yourself and your ambition with your own career? Well, I had that, and I just kept working. The one thought I had in mind was, someday, at some point in time, there's going to be an interest in my work, and unless I have the work to support that interest or to address that interest, I will never be known as an artist. So I have to keep working. And so for a long time, I worked just, because that's what I do. At one point you might have said it was an obsession, and it was like that. But I just kept working, and I don't know. I never lacked for ideas. I never lacked for ideas of what I wanted to do with my art. But I couldn't have dreamed. I honestly could not have dreamed of the kind of support and attention that I am receiving. It goes beyond my wildest dreams. And when that happens, how do you deal with that? Because you had sort of not really been able to prepare yourself for something to happen that went beyond your dreams. So that was a little bit daunting, and then the next thing was the demands, the demands that are being placed, and they're good ones. They're good demands and they're important demands, but it requires my attention. So I have had to, as John knows, shift gears away from the administrative work, shift gears away from other work that I'm asked to do, and focus and on my art. And so, it's an existential question. What is an artist? What does an artist have to do? What does an artist have to say? And what's important to be said?
I think one of the things, my observation in knowing your work, and I know here we're talking about community catalyst and working at the community level, but I also think you're a very strong art maker. You have the technical command of it. You have the finesse and the seasoned practice of making art for decades. And out of that, but you also you're very much, as you said, anchored in respect for community and ceremony. And how does that play into what happens on the canvas and in the multimedia work that you do?
Well, I've gone back and forth. Do I try to express something that is immediately identifiable as Native American, or as coming from a Seneca perspective? Is that the first thing that I have to think about whenever I approach the art or the canvas or whatever it is I'm creating? And for me, I have to do what I think is important. If it's going to look and address specific things about my own cultural heritage, that may be true, and it might work for some pieces. But for other things, I just have to take a subject that is important to me. For example, I did a couple of paintings about the Erie Canal. Now, the Erie Canal does not sound like a Seneca subject matter, but the Erie Canal had an incredible impact on all of our Six Nations territories. This big ditch was dug across New York State, went through our territories, transformed the landscape, brought commerce into New York State. Many of you out there are saying, what's wrong with that? Well, nothing is wrong with that if you're not trying to live there and maintain a way of life. If you are living there and you're trying to maintain a way of life and suddenly a ditch is dug through your backyard, that's a problem. Okay, if all the game scatters and goes south and you're left there with nothing but barbed wire and domestic animals around you and things like that, that's a problem. And if of course, eventually, what the decision that is made is Buffalo needs to be the terminus for the Erie Canal. This is 1825. So we are living at Buffalo. We've been living at Buffalo since 1783. That's our homeland right then. So what happens when people suddenly decide, well, this is going to turn into a very, very important seaport for the inland Great Lakes? Well, we have to deal with that. And it means that, again, they're going to take our land away from us in order to make that happen. And so we deal with two fraudulent treaties. First one, 1838. So you can hear, there's a definite connection to the Erie Canal and the Seneca Nation. But you have to understand your history to see why there is a connection. I have to, not you, I have to. And then I have to start to somehow convey that through the art I create so that you might get some glimpse into how I see it.
But Peter, I'm seeing, there's a lot of artists out there. A lot are working on social justice issues, on equity issues, and all of that. Yeah. But it seems that you're also bringing in a deeper history as a historian and writer. And you've looked at, there's a kind of cliche that we talk about in some parts of the arts community about place matters and how do we animate place. And so what I've observed over the years is seeing what you created in the historic site and the Longhouse that became a real teaching center and a real destination, a kind of destination for students, for tourists, for people in the community. Yeah. How did that connect to the art making?
Well, I don't know exactly how it directly related to the art making, but very quickly, it started off with this. We have a dance and music festival that we put on every year at Ganondagan. It takes place in July. And the people and the artists kept coming to me and saying, what we need something like Santa Fe's Indian Market. We need a place where people know that they can come there and they're going to be able to buy the best of what is being produced by Haudenosaunee artists and Seneca artists. And so, then we'll add that component to the dance and music festival, a bigger component of art. Well, there's only so much you can do when it's outdoors and it's under tents and so forth. And so, I knew we needed a new building. I knew we needed something that was a statement about contemporary architecture. We needed something that supplied all the needs that we had on an auditorium like this. It had to have, a gallery space. It had to have classrooms. It had to have a caterer's kitchen. It had to have a gift shop. It had to have a lot of different things. Well, that meant I had to raise $11 million. So, I just figured out how to raise $11 million and a little bit more. And then we had an art space. We can continue that art exhibit. We can do it in December. We don't have to do it in the summer. We can do it. It's going to open next Friday night. So this Friday night. So, you see the need, you address the need. What does it take to address that need? And then the belief that you can do it. There was a time during that process when the entire bottom fell out of the project. Our biggest financial supporter said she couldn't meet her obligation. So that's a problem. Small problem, Pete, as a friend of mine says once in a while. So, I went right to the source and said, I addressed it directly. You got to figure out how you're going to do it and come up with some ideas and we'll talk about it. But you can't just walk away from the project. You can't just leave, or pull back. So you have to figure out how to solve the problem. Solve the problem. That's the thing to do. I don't know. I think at this point I'm sounding so strident. I want to kind of back off a little bit.
No, it's fine. What's amazing about as you tell the story about the physical space and raising the money so you can have the structure and all of that. But what I'm impressed with of what you accomplished is all the programmatic side of it. So you included like local agriculture, you included a kind of ceremonial way of life, and how did you do that? How did you get the community corralled around that and get the enthusiasm, the knowledge, the lesson plan, all of that stuff that you have to do?
Well, again, my cousin John Mohawk had started something called the Iroquois White Corn Project. And he had a very good idea, which was our people were eating food that wasn't good for us. Our diabetes was out of control. Our heart issues are out of control because we're eating fast food, we're eating junk. And we have to go back to our traditional diet. Somehow we've got to make it possible for our people to have access to our heirloom foods. And so he started this project called the Iroquois White Corn Project. And he kind of brought me in on it. And, I used some of my land for 1 year for planting. And we did other things, to keep the project going. And then he passed away. And when he and his wife passed away, all of the equipment, all of the things he had accomplished were just sitting idly. And I knew that it was time to bring all of that to Ganondagan. So it meant that I had to work out a deal with my other cousin and say, I want to rent the equipment until I can buy it. And then, eventually we'll buy it. I want to encourage our farmers to keep growing it. And that's where we'll get our corn from. And I'll go to each of the communities and find out who is growing it and give them the, the support that they need and buy the corn that they can let us have. And, but with that, it really, two reasons why that was important. When the French army came after us in 1687, they destroyed 1,200,000 bushels of corn that were being grown by our people. Okay, so corn was an essential to our way of life. When the Sullivan-Clinton campaign under George Washington's command and orders came and destroyed in our communities, another 250,000 bushels of corn. Corn is corn is an essential thing, and we've got to bring it back. We've got to have it back in our community. So I have a Friends organization. The Friends organization was very supportive of the idea. It's a not-for-profit, and they're able to receive support, and they're able to help keep the White Corn Project going. And I just found ways to then reach out to the big volunteer base that's out there, that's interested in the idea of agriculture, that's interested in the work, that wants to learn how to husk corn, how to braid corn, how to hang up ears of corn. That doesn't sound like very exciting maybe, but you'd be surprised at how much fun that is, to sit in a barn on a hay bale and pull husks off corn cobs and then hand them over to the people that know how to create braids of them so they can be hung up to dry for another 4 months or 3 months. And, you build community by doing that. You build a larger community of people that look forward to that event, the husking bee. They look forward to coming and helping sort the corn so that we get the finest kernels of our corn for our product. And they look forward to eating it. Their payment for a day's work is a bowl of soup, and they love it.
Peter, you were talking earlier when we met yesterday about some of the politics of food and kind of the history of, and here we are right on the cusp of preparing for yet another anniversary in our country of the Revolutionary War, and marking that. What are your thoughts about that, and what are you doing to kind of pave the way in your own community and beyond it? What would you have all of us listening this evening? What do we need? You talked about ideas of the founding fathers and the ideas of some of the battles and the focus on battlegrounds and the bullets and all that, but they miss the cultural piece of it. Reflect a little on that.
Okay, I'm going to share a story that I was reminded of. I knew this. I knew the vague outlines of it, but I didn't know the details. So I'm going to just share this story, and I'll do it in a way that I hope is you can follow it and it makes sense. So in 1744, whenever the Continental Congress and whenever the people that were trying to form the United States were getting together, whether it was in Virginia or whether it was in Albany or wherever it was, we Haudenosaunee people were there because we represented a force that had to be acknowledged. Okay, so in 1744, there was a meeting that was taking place, and a young Onondaga stood up and said, he suggested to the people that were in the meeting, you should form a union. Look at us. We have a union of 5 nations, and these 5 nations, at that point, it was actually 6 nations, is so strong that we cannot be broken apart because we have united ourselves together for our mutual interests and our mutual defense. All right. And he said, and look at you. You are 13 struggling little colonies that haven't got any sort of sense of union at all. You're divided by religious things that are bugging each other. And, so you need to think about forming a union. Okay. So fast forward, 1756, they come to Albany. We come to Albany. They are meeting in Albany. These same kinds of people that are forming a union are thinking about forming a union. Let me put it that way. They're thinking about forming it. But that's what they said to us. We have taken your advice. We are going to form a union, and that union will be strong enough to defeat Great Britain. Now, that idea, this revolutionary fervor was not believed by most people. I mean, look at what Great Britain was at that time. They were a very mighty force. They had gone around the world making colonies here and there by taking their armies and defeating those people that were there. So when that idea was put out there that this group of 13 states, still not states, but colonies, was going to form a union and it was going to take on Great Britain and push Great Britain out, that was pretty crazy. But you are the beneficiaries of that. That's what happened. But that idea, the seeds for that idea was planted by us. That notion, when they told that story that they were going to do this, we were sitting there listening to them, listening to their words. And at that time, there was a recognition that we are sovereign. We are a sovereign group of people. And eventually, in 1794, we sign a treaty, which George Washington signs, which the Congress ratifies in 1795, January of 1795, recognizing our sovereignty as 6 nations, okay, and recognizing the lands that we are occupying. And that treaty is called the Ganondagan Treaty, and we commemorate it every year on November the 11th. We're still doing it. We did it this past November the 11th to commemorate that treaty between the United States and the Six Nations. And so, these are the pieces of the history that are not in the story told about the American Revolution. The story told about the American Revolution as it pertains to us is that the Sullivan-Clinton campaign was a glorious military victory that came through and destroyed our towns and our foods so that we could not supply the British with the food that they needed to maintain the war, right? We weren't concerned about feeding the English. We were concerned about feeding ourselves, right? We didn't look to them for our food. In fact, when when those towns were destroyed and we went to where they were, which was Fort Niagara, they didn't have anything to offer us, essentially. We had to live in little huts through a winter where the snow fell nearly 6 feet deep and remained for the whole winter, living in huts without food, without adequate, access to big game. On and on.
That's quite a story. I mean, Peter, how do you see amplifying that so it becomes part of a broader national conversation? I mean, it's such a challenge because so much of it is not known at all by the general public.
I went to a conference. It was at a community college in central New York. And all of the people there were historians, right? And they're real historians, not like me. They were real historians, okay? So we went to this conference, and I was the only one invited to tell the other side of the story, right? So anyway, they got up, a couple of them, and they told their version of the Sullivan-Clinton campaign. And what they want to do is trace where every bullet went, what kind of a carbine they were using, who had what, and how do we know this, and all of the rest of it. It's all about armament, and it's all about fighting and war, right? And the story I came to tell them was what you mainly accomplished in that fight that you came and had supposedly with us was that you destroyed vegetables. You destroyed corn, you destroyed beans, you destroyed squash, you cut down the finest apple orchards, you cut down the finest peach orchards, you burned our houses, okay? You didn't kill us off, which is what you wanted to do. And you didn't get us all as prisoners, which is what you wanted to do, but it didn't happen, okay? So when you tell the story, let's tell the real story of what the military campaign really accomplished and make it a story that is kind of a cautionary story. This is before there was any notion of telling of a law that said anything about genocide. It's the Second World War before we start talking about genocide, really talking about genocide. And if I say there was an American Holocaust, no one wants to hear it. In fact, they will not publish that. If I say that, if I want to write that, I doubt that I could find somebody to publish that. So how do we tell the story that you're asking me about, and what do we do? Well, there's a whole group of young people who are in your schools right now who are re-examining that history that they've been given. And they're coming to me to tell me what they have learned and ask my view of what they say. And I'm saying to you, right on. Yeah, you understand. So now it's up to you because you are young, you're the writers, and it's, in time, you will be the ones who will tell the story.
It sounds, Peter, that you're more hopeful than maybe I had heard from you earlier. These historians are really digging deeper and they're going to bring this out?
The young historians, the real young historians are going to bring it out. The older historians are not going to change their view of the Revolutionary War. For them, the Revolutionary War, is presented one way, and that's the way it's going to stay. So I can't make them change. There's no way. And I'm not even going to spend any time on that. But there needs to be materials available while there is still the mood in the United States for it, for some education of the people about their true history, about actually what happened here in the United States, what happened, how did land come into the possession of the people who hold deeds to their lands here in the United States. What transpired? Okay, it's not easy. I'm not saying it's an easy subject to hear and learn about or to have to study, but when do we acknowledge the true history of the United States? Because what I have dealt with and had to deal with is the American mythology. The American mythology has had a negative effect on us, okay? It has given us a situation where we are looked at as a kind of a stereotype and not as the real human beings that we are. And because the story that is most, that grabs people most is the story when one of our groups goes and blockades a road and puts up barriers and burns tires. That will get front page story. But what we're doing in the communities to keep our people, healthy, to keep our people using our own language, to maintain our way of life, that is the story that they don't want to tell. So I'm not even saying they have to tell it. I'm just saying this is the reality. This is what really is going on. And we have maintained that through all of the things that have happened to us. We should talk about art.
Yeah, yeah, really. Well, how are you going to bring in the artistic side into being a catalyst?
This.
Yeah. And also about the monuments. I mean, you reflected on that too.
Yeah. So in about 1929, there were these monuments that were put up to commemorate the Sullivan-Clinton campaign of 1779. So in 1929, these monuments were put up on what they call the Clinton-Sullivan Trail. They began in eastern Pennsylvania, and then they worked their way up into southern tier of New York State, and then they came across New York State. And as they came across New York State, they encountered us or our towns or our food, and they started destroying. Okay, so then they put up monuments in 1929 glorifying what the Army did. And, of course, telling the story from a single point of view. So what we have to do is at least, put up some other kinds of signage that corrects the view that is placed there, that was placed there in 1929, to at least tell the other side of the story, or to at least tell the truth of what happened. And I realize again, that not everyone has the stomach for that. So we ourselves, Haudenosaunee, and those who understand the true history, we will be the ones who will be doing that. Where that fits in the art, I don't know yet. Maybe I'll get involved in some of the art that goes on the signage.
It seems like it's been a real breakout couple of years. I mean, I was so pleasantly surprised that the Whitney Museum did the one woman show, the solo show retrospective of John Quick to See Smith.
Yes.
I'm grateful that you're being honored with the Johnson Fellowship. I'm grateful that Jeffrey Gibson is going to represent us at the Venice Biennale. There's a lot. Kay Walking Stick is having a remarkable, career. But this has been slow coming, and I'm seeing like some of the mainstream major art institutions are now beginning to put in their acquisition budget and acquire more native work. And I think that's very important. I know there are people in this room and on this stream tonight who themselves are collectors of contemporary Native American art. Yep. And that's important.
Very important.
How do we keep, and it is very important, how do we keep cultivating that and moving it in a forward movement? I mean, it's such a challenge.
Well, I mean, these major institutions that you're talking about, they have to show leadership. The Whitney, the National Gallery, the MoMA, they have to show leadership. And by that leadership, perhaps others will be convinced and perhaps follow. But ultimately, people have to collect what they like. They have to find the things that please them and that they want around them, and, that to them have an authenticity. And so, it's really up to the collectors, and it's up to those who care about art to open their eyes and look and take the time to try and understand, something that they previously didn't really have a lot of knowledge of, perhaps, or they didn't see much of. Because, as I said, we were kept out of those institutions. The curators were not putting our work into those shows. So now that that's changing, and it has been changing, but it's a short amount of time. It's only been about 3 years that it's happening, just a little more maybe. But at any rate, now that it's happening, can we keep it going? Can we keep the, I'm again, I think about one of my friends who wasn't happy to know that there had to be a Native American show, that there had to be an African American show, that there had to be a woman show, whatever. Why aren't we all a part of the art world? Why isn't all of this a part of the art world, a greater, and not to, segregate us, but that is where we came from. And so now we are working to change that narrative, and it's gradually happening.
Well, I think one of the things is that we have a lot of Native American curators that are coming into their own. Kathleen Ash Milby at the Portland Museum, Andrea Hanley at Native Arts and Cultures Foundation, Joe Horsecapture at the Autry. There are some incredible, talented people who are curating and really working with all of these Native artists. But I think you're right, having the leadership that we kind of demand and really request strongly from the major institutions. I mean, it was thrilling to see those two huge historic paintings that Kent Monkman did that were on display at the Metropolitan Museum, and they've hired Patricia Norby as the Native curator there. She's doing wonderful work. Yeah, there's a lot more to do.
There is a lot more to do, and fortunately, their people are now there, or have made their way gradually to those places where they can be that curator, or they can be that writer, or that person that does the organizing. We have more people now in place through various kinds of cultural programs or curatorial programs that they've been involved with for the last 10 years or so.
It takes a lot. There's two institutions. I know the work that the National Museum of the American Indian has done in contemporary Native work and acquiring, they've come to the table a lot. I think the Denver Art Museum is doing a big major event in 2025 because they've been collecting contemporary Native work since 1925. Mm-hmm. And so there are some turning points, and I think you're part of it. You have helped lead the way. We are unfortunately running out of time here. I've learned so much, continue to learn from you, Peter. It's just great. Congratulations on this wonderful honor. And we will close with that. Nolan?
Wow, I just only can say that to both of you for that wonderful conversation. I felt like yesterday we had this little thing over at the staff, and we call it the family conversation. Remember that, Peter? I just really felt so comfortable tonight listening to all that conversation and understanding that we were taking in so much of a life, like so much about a life that has certainly been a demonstration to this country of the value of culture and value of art and what it can bring into this. I often make the comment that the greatest asset we give ourselves, the greatest resource we have for each other is our time. And certainly your time tonight has really refreshed us in that way. Please join me and give them another great time. So bear with me just a few moments, and you won't be hearing my baritone voice for very much longer. But at any rate, the stage of what we're going to move into now is to make sure we close the evening, and it's really my pleasure to present D. Peter Jemison with the Johnson Fellowship for Artists Transforming Communities official award for this year. In reflecting on what this award is all about, I believe our benefactor and awards namesake, Robert Leroy Yankee Johnson, would have been extremely pleased that we are now recognizing you, Peter, tonight. Yankee and his wife, Laurel, believed that artists had a unique power to improve the quality of life for individuals, as well as to transform our communities. And that's the story we've heard tonight. Yankee was a pioneer in the areas of community arts development and public art. He was the first executive director of the King County Arts Commission in Washington State. He's widely credited with laying the groundwork for Northwest's thriving public arts scene. Yankee served on the board of Americans for the Arts in its early years. He was an ardent voice at the table, encouraging Americans for the Arts' continued support of the community arts movement, as well as the role of artists in the community, values we deeply espouse today. Yankee believed in the voice of the community in recognizing and rewarding excellence. Before I present the award to Peter, I'd like to read one of the nominating letters we received from one of your peers, the venerated artist and political activist, Sean Quick-to-See-Me Smith. I want to make sure you understand I'm reading her letter that was written to us at this time. Thank you for the invitation to write on behalf of G. Peterson Jemison, Seneca Nation. I met Peter around 1978, where he became the founding director of the American Indian Community House Gallery under the umbrella of the American Indian Community House in New York, which offered services such as food, medical, and emergency funds to Native Americans stranded in New York. In conjunction with that resource, Peter created not only a gallery for art, but also a gathering place for indigenous peoples in the city. It served multiple purposes, such as poetry readings, performances like Spider Woman Theater, or Floyd Westerman's A Sioux Folk Singer, meetings for the activist discussions, and other gatherings that were purely social with refreshments so natives in the city would not feel so alone. Peter and his girlfriend lived in a 2-room apartment, and often visitors like myself were allowed to spend the night on their living room futon. Peter's life then, as well as now, was and is devoted to community service. In those days, many of the exhibitions were not only Native artists that Peter discovered in the city, but invitations he extended across the country to his activist friends in Chicago, Seattle, San Francisco, Albuquerque, and elsewhere. Peter is a one-man band, would organize programming around each of these exhibits. He would welcome out-of-town Indians to meet at gatherings with the natives living in New York. It was a small group. Peter would take everyone to Chinatown, where he could feed visiting artists and a good meal for a modest cost. Programming in the gallery would be a combination of multiple events during the run of the exhibit. He would organize a Native musician or a group of musicians or speaker that would give an educational talk about Native culture, or he might hold a beadwork class and invite people from outside the community. Peter worked to create social networks in the city with funders of cultural events, nonprofits, museums, and interested social activities. Over time, Peter developed contacts throughout the city. He was often invited to serve on funding boards of juries for arts organizations or to attend meetings for city budgets, and many of New York's social and arts programs came to accept that, yes, there were Native Americans alive and living in the city. He probably did more to raise consciousness about Native peoples and their plights living in the city than perhaps the social agencies that dealt with them. Peter saw himself as a cultural bridge between the margins and the mainstream. He definitely was a promoter of equity and inclusion. Around 1984, I organized a Native women's exhibit with Harmony Hammond and Lucy Lippert, and it was scheduled to exhibit at the AR Gallery in New York. But something fell through the cracks and it was canceled. So I called Peter to see if he could possibly exhibit the 24 Native women in sweetgrass, cedar, and sage. Peter reworked his calendar and scheduled the exhibit. He did a great job with the programming on a meager budget. Spider Woman Theater did an afternoon performance. Peter set up a long makeshift table in a vacant lot and had catered food brought from Chinatown so everyone who attended mostly Native peoples, were able to have a community feast in celebration. Eating together is very important in Indian peoples. Many of the women who were in the exhibit made the trip to New York to attend the opening. Peter had an amazing ability to put these celebratory events together so Native Americans would feel it was really truly done in a Native way. Peter made everyone aware that this was the first exhibition in America of living Native women who were printmakers, painters, bead workers, photographers, and quilt makers. Peter has become known for his advocacy of women's rights and support of women. So he was and become more and more an advocacy for women's rights and support of women. So he was an enthusiastic advocate for this exhibition, and his support gave this exhibit a lasting legacy. Peter directed AICH Gallery in New York, but yearned to return home and study traditional culture as he had been moving in that direction for many years and traveling back and forth between New York and Seneca territory. He definitely left a mark on New York art world due to his diligent networking and constant advocacy for Native art of many living artists of all tribes across the country. From 1978 to 1985, Peter gradually coming to his decision that he needed to do some kind of cultural work in his home territory when an opportunity to direct and manage the Ganondagan site at Victor, New York was offered to him. In his personal life, Peter has studied with the elders to become one of the most learned scholars and keepers of Seneca knowledge. At the same time, he is called upon across the country and Europe for advice and knowledge about traditional cultural ways. There are many facets to Peter's life. All have a relationship to the visionary, idealistic way that he values his tribe, his ancestry, his elders, his future generations of tomorrow. Besides Peter's cultural work on boards of trustees, he worked as consultant with the National Museum of the American Indian for the Museum on the Mall. There is one position on an organization formed in 1990 that is vital to all Indian projects. Peter was appointed by the elders in his tribe to attend the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act meetings in order to repatriate Seneca masks. Peter was honored to have this appointment, but when he asked for the documentation, he had difficulty getting it, and through his diligence, he found out that the mask had been doused in arsenic or possibly other dangerous materials. After receiving the mask and placing them in storage, and with much research, Peter found a lab that would cleanse the mask with the supplement. This discovery impacted the tribes nationwide. Imagine that unknowingly tribal people would have accepted cultural works of art and the toxin accompanying them, perhaps causing life-debilitating diseases. I have an emotional reaction to this important project for all the cultural benefits that Peter has given to so many of us, and certainly this particular discovery and research for a healthy solution impacts human lives of Native peoples by the thousands. Yes, Peter deserves many awards, but especially this one. Closing, Sean Quick to See Smith.
Thank you, Nola.
Peter, on behalf of Americans for the Arts, it is truly my great honor to present to you the 2023 Johnson Fellowship for Artists Transforming Communities. This concludes our program this evening. I'd like to thank the staff for the of the Rich at the Kennedy Center and the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, President Deborah Rutter, for supporting this conversation in this wonderful space. I would like to thank our AV team, Creative Video, for the recording and live streaming of the event, and our ASL interpreters for the live stream, Patrice Herring and Andrea Sturman. A big thanks also to Occasions Catering for the lovely reception. We are grateful to and thank our Johnson Fellowship Nominating Committee and Selection Panel for providing their professional expertise in selecting this year's recipient, many of whom are joining us on the live stream. I would be remiss if I also did not recognize the staff, my staff of Americans for the Arts, for their organization and coordination of this event, both in person and online, and those in the room, please wave for others to see you. Finally, thanks to all of you who have joined us in this celebration, both in person and virtually. We value you and your work to support the arts and their role in transforming all of our lives. Good night, and thank you.